honored and always privileged. It's always an honor and always a privilege to share with this group of uh, wonderful human beings and amazing people of God. And I want to say thank you, of course, to Pastor Hyro for this invitation. I want to give respect and deference also to one of the fathers of the city, uh, our very own um, Reverend, the amazing Reverend, we call him Father. Amen. Amen. Here we go. I want to go into this lesson on the day. There we go. We are at Daniel chapter 3. On the day, we are at Daniel chapter 3, verses 16 through 18. Amen. And on today, I want to talk from this topic and share with you this thought: the grace to stand. If we were in church, if we were in the building in person, I would tell you to look at your neighbor. But since we're on Zoom today, if you don't mind, you can type in the chat and type to your neighbor and tell your neighbor you have the grace to stand. I want us to
Amen.
consider there's a colloquialism, there's a cliche that we've heard for many years that says, if you don't stand for something, you will fall for anything. I can remember being a young person, a teenager, and my father telling me this, giving me these great words, letting me know that I have to make a decision to stand and do the right thing, make a decision to stand for righteousness and stand for justice. And understanding that now as an adult, I see in the biblical text that we have an example of individuals who show us what it looks like to take a stand. But before
Amen.
we get to the biblical text, some of us may be old enough and young enough at the same time to remember that in 1968, in the Olympics, there was a man named Tommy Smith and a man named John Carlos. And they stood on the podium and raised their fists in a silent protest against racial injustice and oppression. That moment cost them everything. They were expelled from the Olympics and blackballed from their careers, but they stood anyway. This brings us also to recognize in the biblical text that there are three Hebrew boys, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. You may know them as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. When I was a kid, I heard one old preacher say, "My shack, your shack, in a bungalow." But that's all right. We still thank God for these three young men who stand as examples on the day. But the question
Amen.
and the query on the day that I want us to consider and carry away is question number one: what are you standing for? Question number two: how are you standing? And question number three: who is standing with you? I want you to consider this: your convictions will be tested when culture tells you that you have to compromise. We see that in this day, what these gentlemen are going through is an issue with the king. They're going through an issue with the government. They are going through being oppressed and now about to be assassinated by the government. And so the
Yeah.
king issues the decree. And because these three Hebrew boys decide not to bow, they decide not to give in to culture, they decide not to give in to society, they decide not to give in to the pressure and the influence of this egomaniacal king. These young men
Amen.
were taken from Judah to Babylon, but they never lost their identity. They were prominent government officials. And then King Nebuchadnezzar had ordered everyone to bow to his golden statue, but they refused. I want you to remember this on the day that sometimes when you make a stand, you have to look around and see who is standing with you. One thing that
Absolutely.
we learned from these three Hebrew boys, and I want us to realize this on the day, is that you are never standing alone. You are never standing alone. Now, as we move forward, we see that they have the pressure on them to bow. So, what you worship determines when you will compromise. The king demands that they give their full allegiance, and everyone else bowed. But the three Hebrew young men, they stood. They could have justified bowing by saying, God knows my heart. They could have justified bowing by saying, oh, it's just this one time that we've got to give in. It's just this one time that we've got to go against what our righteous decisions would cause us to do. It's only this one time. They could have said, we
Mm.
can bow on the outside, but we know in our hearts that we're worshiping God. They could have chosen to be hypocritical in how they walked out their conviction, but they
Amen.
refuse to give in. They refuse to give in. I want you to know that you have the courage to stand, you have the courage to hold your position, and you have the divine courage to not give in. So, the question, what are you standing for? What are you standing for? You must ask yourself, what do I stand for? Do I stand on the side of justice? Do I stand on the side of liberation? Do I stand on the side of those who fight against oppression and abuse of the marginalized and the less fortunate? What side are you standing on? There's an old song that we used to sing in the church that said, whose side are you leaning on?
Yes.
Well, let's act like we in church. Type in the comments and type to your neighbor and say, I'm leaning on the Lord's side.
Leaning
So
on Lord.
they stand on God's truth. They stand on God's power. They stand on their conviction in God's ability. And that's what I want you to stand on. I want you to stand on God's truth. I want you to stand on God's power and stand on the divine conviction of God's ability to come through in your life. How
Yes.
are you standing? How are you standing? How are you standing? What is your posture? What is your position? Don't stand with your head bowed down or stand with cast down or stand looking down, but you should stand looking up. As a matter of fact, the Bible tells you to lift up your head, O ye gates, and be ye
Oh,
lifted up, ye everlasting doors, and the King of glory will come in. How are you
hallelujah.
standing? Standing. I want you to stand strong. That means you don't waver. I want you to stand in faith. That means you stand in an overwhelming confidence that God is going to come through on your behalf. I want you to
Yes, Lord.
stand with integrity. I want you to stand in the character and the consciousness of Christ, knowing that you must do what's right, even when no one is watching.
Mm.
Last but not least, who's standing with you? Who is standing with you? We must recognize that these three Hebrew boys were standing as knowledgeable men. They were standing as men of good stature. They were standing as intelligent men. They were standing as men with good character. Hopefully, you have men and women standing with you who are knowledgeable, people of good character, and people who reflect the image of Christ. Hopefully, you
Yeah.
have people standing with you that can fight with you and not fight against you. Hopefully, you have people standing with you that can fight for you and not fight against you. Hopefully, you have people standing with you that are willing to fight and not run when it's time to stand
Amen.
and fight. But know this, not only has God assigned people to your life, but I want you to recognize that God is standing with you even when you don't know it. God is standing with you even when you don't see God standing with you. As a matter of fact, who you stand with determines how long you're able to stand. As I close, let's remember these three Hebrew boys stood in this fire long enough for the fire to be turned up 7 times hotter. Yeah, I want you to be encouraged on today as we close, but just keep standing. Type to your neighbor one last time and tell them, keep standing. You might have to stand until the situation gets worse. You might have to stand until it seems like all hope is gone. You might have to stand until it seems like things are not going to work out. You might have to stand for another 3 years until we get another chance to go to the polls and vote for things to change. You might have to stand long enough, watch this, for Jesus to show up in your situation. That's right. They stayed in that fire long enough until the king and the authorities looked around and they said, King, did we not throw 3 people in the fire? And the king
My God.
said, well, let me take a look. And the king said, oh, it looks like there are four in the fire. I know we only threw three people in there, but then there's a divine revelation that hits. There's a divine illumination, and y'all know the story. And the king says, oh, but the fourth one looks like the Son of God. Well, that's the reason why they were able to stand, and that's the reason why they were not only able to stand. And I want to tell you, God has given you the grace not only to stand, but God has given you the grace to come out. God has given you the grace to come out not smelling like smoke. God has given you the grace to come out not looking like what you've been through. God has given you the grace to come out with victory. So keep standing in the power of God. Don't stand with the culture that goes against doing the best for God's people. Don't stand with the culture that only serves a political agenda but does not serve all of humanity. Don't stand with those who regurgitate oppressive theology. Don't stand with those who only want to limit the ability for all of God's people to have access and to have progress. But continue to stand firm, continue to stand up, and continue to stand with God. As a matter of fact, stand fast in the liberty wherewith God has made us free. And remember this, if you don't remember anything else, you have the grace to stand because you are not standing alone. I'm Bill
Hallelujah.
Ellis. That's my message for today. God bless you. I love everybody.
Well, thank you, Pastor Ellis, for a beautiful message. Who is standing with you? And then you answered the question. I truly hope that we all sort of receive that message. Amen.